Omniscience Draft for Duskmourn has just dropped and it's crazy. If you want to be drawing your whole deck on turn 1 and milling your opponent out, then I've got a step-by-step guide on how to do that consistently. So Omniscience Draft is a temporary quick draft queue where each player has an Omniscience emblem in play the whole game. That allows you to cast spells from your hand for free, and once per turn you can activate it to get one of every mana. Because it's quick draft, you are drafting against bots, and that is very important because the bots are trying to draft as if they're playing normally. What that means is cards that you really want, that normally you wouldn't, will often get to you very late. If you're trying to draft this just by, picking big creatures and not thinking about it much more than that, you're going to have a bad time. The final strange thing about this is that it is actually a ranked mode. So you can very quickly climb your way up the rank ladder with this if you know what you're doing. So the ideal game plan is turn 1, you draw your deck and you kill your opponent. Ideally, you never have to go to your backup plan. With that in mind, I'm going to kind of walk down the priority draft list for you. First things first, you want card draw. You're not going to be able to get through most of your deck if you don't have lots of card draw effects. And that's why Meat Locker Drowned Diner is maybe the best card in this format. For free, you get to see 3 cards, discard 1, and those 2 leftover cards can easily be cards that draw more cards. And then because it is a permanent in play, there are multiple ways to return it to your hand, cast it again, and just continue snowballing. Beyond that, any spell that draws 2 or digs and draws 1 is quite good. So we're talking Glimmerburst, Derelict Attic, Grab the Prize, even Vengeful Possession, Commune with Evil, and then also cards like Enter the Enigma just allow you to cycle into a new card. The second most important thing is counterspells. If you're going second and you have no counterspell, and they start casting Drowned Diners on you, you're just dead. So Twist Reality becomes amazing in this, and also Fear of Imposters is actually good here, unlike the normal format. A special shout out to Get Out, which is both a counterspell and also a way to return your own creatures' enchantments back to your own hand to get value from them. Get Out is an absolute all-star in this format. There's also a set of cards that care about recurring permanents, and that can be great because again, you can get back your Drowned Diner or other value cards. Using things like Say Its Name, Under the Skin, or even Rickety Gazebo can be extremely strong here. Other ways to return cards to your hand: Fear of Isolation can be great. If you happen to have 2 of them, you can even start doing loops. If you have a win condition along with that loop, then you can just win on the spot. Also, cards that just return permanents in one go, such as an Unnerving Grasp or Vanish from Sight, can be used to rebuy your own cards rather than interact with your opponent's cards. The next section of things is Disruption. So because you only draw 3 cards at the start of the game, being able to interact with your opponent's hand can be a decent way of stopping them from winning. If you go first, they've mulliganed, and then you make them discard 2, well, then they've almost lost on the spot. Let's Play a Game makes somebody discard 2 is very good disruption. It's actively good to play Cracked Skull, whether it be on your creature or their creature, doesn't really matter, you just want to see their hand and take a card out of it. And the other section of cards is just ways to win. So as you might have already guessed, Scrabbling Skull Crab is actually very good here, with the Eerie trigger of milling target player for 2, and you are trying to build a deck full of rooms and ways to recast them and trigger them over and over again. It's very legitimate to be able to mill out your opponent. If you get a loop going, then that will do it for sure. Slightly less obvious is Bale Murkleech, which, although it only does 1 damage per Eerie trigger, that's still fine. Again, if you're creating a loop, it doesn't matter how many triggers you need, you're going to get there. You can also often end up in situations where you've drawn a bunch of cards, you've put a bunch of large creatures into play, and you just have a few counterspells in your hand. And if your opponent only has 1 or 2 cards, you've basically locked them out of the game and you can just win next turn in 1 attack step. A couple of other things to think about when drafting. Marina Vendril is insane in this format. Even just hitting 1 card would be fine, but often you will hit multiples and then you will just fill your hand from there. And if you end up in a position where it goes to the following turn and you need to use her ability, being able to reuse some of your room abilities and re-trigger all of those Eerie triggers is amazing. One thing for you to keep in mind is not drawing so many cards that you mill yourself out. So ways around that are drafting a Chandelier, so you can keep putting good cards back into your deck from your graveyard, and also Cathartic Parting, which does a very similar job. So if you want all these cards, what order should you be picking them in? So the bots are drafting as if they're playing normally. I will say that the order I've mentioned things is generally the order that you care about them, but not necessarily the order that the bots care about them. There is a decent chance that you will be able to get counterspells quite late, and you should be able to get a few of your win conditions like Leech, maybe even the Scrabbler very late as well. You should be picking more highly saved blue draw spells, relevant uncommons, and try to wheel things like the niche black commons. Normally for deck building, you don't want to be playing any basic lands, however there are some exceptions. If you need to be paying for activated abilities such as found footage, then you might want to add some lands. Since you get 5 mana per turn, if you have say 2 found footage, it shouldn't be a problem, but if you're playing 3, 4, 5, you're going to want some lands potentially to be able to pay to chain those together. For example, the flashback on Rite of the Moth is uncastable unless you have a plains in your deck. It's not an unreasonable strategy to play some land cyclers with the lands, bin them, thin your deck of the land, play the land, and then maybe reanimate the creature later, or just help your deck have more gas. The gameplay for this mode is extremely degenerate. Both of you draw 3 cards, and you really want to be going first. An ideal opening hand would be something like 2 draw spells and 1 counter spell. If you're on the play and you don't have a draw spell to start, I would say you should be mulliganing to find one, at least until 2 cards. If you're on the draw, ideally you want a counter spell to stop their draw spell. The only time I wouldn't be mulliganing for that is if you have, say, multiple of your own draw spells and you're just hoping that they don't. If you do have a counter spell, you should fire it off on their first draw spell, because it's far better that you stop them from getting 2 mystery cards than you counter something else later after they've drawn 2 mystery cards. Just keep in mind that most of your agency for this format comes from the draft and from the mulligan, but the actual gameplay, well, there's not so much you can do there. So I have no idea how long this mode is lasting. I've heard rumors of maybe like less than a week. If you give it a try, please tell me how it goes for you, and may you always go first.